Like virtually every other trombone technique, articulation is dependent upon the air. Your goal is a steady, solid, constant stream of air, and you superimpose the tongue around that. It's almost as though the air is pre-existing and the tongue is just going to sort of flap in the breeze. I do not recommend thinking of the tongue as a valve or thinking that the tongue starts or stops the air. I prefer thinking as the air is the primary component and the tongue is subordinate to the air. That is, it's not as important. It's important, but there's a symbiotic relationship. The two techniques really rely upon one another. If you think of the tongue as a jet ski that's bouncing off the water, or a speedboat, and the water would be the equivalent to your air, what you get is that your tongue, if this were your tongue, would just be flapping in the breeze. It would bounce off of that airstream, and the air would essentially drive the tongue. And if you do it with no sound, here's what it should sound like. So you get the sensation that the air is always on the move. It's always moving forward. It's never stopped or held back by the tongue. Now if I add the sound to that principle, it makes the tonguing very, very easy. I like to think of tonguing in degrees. So what I just played was a fairly legato tongue. So if you were to measure that, think of a scale from 0 up to 8. And 0 would be no tongue at all, a lip slur or a natural slur. 1 would be very, very legato. 2 legato. 3 right between da and ta. And that's what I just played for you. That's a 3. And then 4 would be ta. And then we get increasingly more accented as we progress to number 8. So I'm going to play the entire spectrum for you, starting with the lowest number and moving all the way over to the highest number and then back to the lowest number. And in between all of those numbers, there are an infinite degree of varieties that you can use. The more you have control over this entire palette of possibilities, the more it will add to your music making skills. I should mention that rarely should you go over to those really, really high numbers, up to number 8, because they tend to be very punchy and perhaps some situations would need it, but it'd be pretty rare. My default number actually is number 3, which I think of as right between da and ta. It's a very deliberate da 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 da, like this. From that point, it's very easy to go either direction. You can add a little bit more tongue if you need more articulation, or you can subtract some. On the other hand, if you start with a heavy T as your default, then it makes it harder to make a difference in either direction. So I like to default to number 3. Almost never would I do this. What you're hearing here is an articulation both on the front and on the back of the note. I hear this from younger players sometimes, and they're attempting to make sure that their articulations are clean, which I understand that's an admirable goal. However, almost never should you cut the tone off with the tongue because it's unmusical, and what you need to do is just let the note stop on its own, like this. So we get a sense that the end of the note is resonating.